And thanks, Dr. Dave. I hope you have a great one. It's good to see you again. We got Dr. Dave, who is our station manager. He was in the studio today, so it's good to see him always. He's like one of the backbones of the station. We wouldn't have a WRUU without Dr. Dave. So my guest today is author Patti Henry. Patti, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, this is such a pleasure. What a lovely way to spend an afternoon. This is great.
Yeah, and we were introduced by Marion Gannon Popple, who's a mutual friend of ours, and so I'm excited to have you on. You have a new book, right?
I do. I have a book out in 48 hours. I mean, who's counting?
Right.
Yeah, it comes out on Tuesday, and it is called Surviving Savannah, and it is set in Savannah.
Oh, nice. Tell me, well, we're going to talk this hour, we're going to talk about it, but tell me a little, like, can you give us like the blurb of the book and like a little overview of just sort of the listeners right now?
Absolutely. So it's historical fiction, and it's based on the very true story of a ship in 1838, this luxury steamship called the steamship Pulaski, who earned herself an entirely new nickname. We now call her the Titanic of the South. And it is about this disastrous trip in 1838, this untold story
what does it mean
has been lost to time and was carrying the elite of Savannah and Charleston north for the summer. And when I first heard about this story, I was curious, and I've learned to follow my curiosity a bit. And I started doing some research and started wondering, is this the next story I want to tell? Is this my next novel? Is this impactful enough? What's inside this story? And I was about 3 weeks into researching this shipwreck when a shipwreck hunting company found the boat.
No way.
Yes.
No way.
30 miles off the coast. I chill bumps, right?
Hold that.
Miles.
Hold that cliffhanger right there. We're gonna.
I know.
That's a good one.
Boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, exactly. Sebastian is my son, Sebastian Messer, and he plays live for us on the show every week. So, Sebastian, would you mind taking it away for us? All right. No. There we go. Awesome, Ass. Thank you. And so, cliffhanger time, Patti.
So when I realized that, and that was beautiful music, by the way, just beautiful.
He's my son Sebastian has been playing this is 6 years now. Yeah, it's been 6 years that he started playing. They've got a band that he's doing, but he plays acoustic too. So
yeah, I was kind of standing here swaying to the music, kind of forgot I was supposed to be talking to you. Yeah, so when I realized that they had found the ship, and that while I was bringing up the lost stories of the passengers, the shipwreck crew was bringing up the lost artifacts and the lost gold and silver and treasures. And I knew that I had to write the story, that I was done thinking about it, that I was going to do it. So I started working with the shipwreck hunting company, and I decided to tell a dual timeline story of a modern day woman who is curating an exhibit of the artifacts, and then two women who were on the ship when it exploded. And that is what the book is about. It is this weaving of present day Savannah with the past of Savannah, the mythology of Savannah, the bigger truth of Savannah, and this higher idea of how do we survive, and then how do we survive the surviving. And that's what the story grew out of.
Oh, wow. So when you say surviving the surviving, what do you mean by that?
Once we get through something, a lot of times, Adam, that's where the story stops, right? You've persevered, you have gotten to the other side, you've had tenacity, you've had bravery, you've survived. The end, right? What happens after that? Who do we choose to become? What do we do with our lives? What do we do with our second chances if we're given one? How do we reconcile the fact that we survived and somebody else didn't?
Right.
And that's what I mean by surviving the surviving.
So it's like the after effects of traumatic experience?
Yeah, and one of the things I discovered when I was doing my research for this book is I decided to focus on one very real family. The names are the Gazaway Bug Lamar family. Just can't make up a name like that, right? And he was a financier for the ship. He was a stockholder. He was a cotton plantationer. He was a well-to-do gentleman in 1838 Savannah. And he brought on this journey his wife, his 6 children, his niece, and his sister. And one of the people who survived, I won't tell you all of them because I want you to read the book, but one of the people who survived is his oldest son, Charlie Lamar. I rename everybody in my book. In my book, his name is Charlie Longstreet. And he is a hero during the days and nights they're at sea. He floated for 5 days and 5 nights on this little scrap of wreckage with 23 other people. Of course, not all 23 of them survived, but Charlie did, and he earned himself a nickname, the Noble Boy.
Oh, wow.
15 years old. Yeah, right? Adam, 20 years later, 1858, he has a new nickname. It is the Red Devil. He's become a slave trader. He brought the ship the Wanderer, the penultimate slave ship, over from the Congo, carrying over 400 enslaved people to Jekyll Island. So how did this boy go from Noble Boy to Red Devil? And how does that bring into question our collective ideas of meant to be, fate, destiny? Because why did he survive when some of his siblings did not? Would they have done better things with their lives? It wouldn't have been hard to do better things with their lives than be a slave trader, right? So I wanted to explore this idea that just surviving doesn't make us worthy. It's our choices and what we do with it. And by following this family and hearing from the women as they navigate this experience, it's a totally different journey than if we're following the captain or the first mate or the dad. We're getting a different perspective on an explosion, on a wreck, and on survival.
Do you feel like the modern retelling of history, maybe rose-colored glasses of that for him? I mean, like, is it based off a true story, or because like we and I think slavery is horrible, right? But if he was a slave trader back in the day, there, like you said, there's a reason for it. And if he was here in the South during the 1850s or whatever, and he was a prominent slave trader, I wonder what the dichotomy is of how his life was that he was living to how we view him today. Like if he saw himself as a hero, or if he saw himself as like, a wealthy businessman, or how, because I mean, obviously, here we are today and we know that, slavery is wrong, but I wonder what, his life was for him, like, being propelled as a hero 20 years later, and he's a wealthy, if he owns 400 slaves, that was a lot of money,
Right. And so I agree with you. And so part of historical fiction is holding up the past as a mirror.
Right.
Who were we then? What is the full truth of a story? Not the mythology of Savannah, but what
Right.
is the fuller truth of things? The reason he had the nickname the Red Devil, and the reason he had a terrible reputation, was slave trading had been illegal, or the importing of slaves had been illegal for, I think, 40 years
Oh
by
wow.
then.
Okay.
It was a total illegal operation. It was done in secrecy. He launched a ship under the New York Harbor pennant and sailed supposedly a luxury cruise to the Congo. And meanwhile, he had outfitted the bottom of this luxury ship.
Mm-hmm.
There's a book about it called The Wanderer. And he had re-outfitted this luxury ship for slaves. It was illegal. He should have been prosecuted and gone to jail, but because he was a well-to-do gentleman in Savannah. And one of the things he was trying to do, which has nothing to do with my book,
Yeah.
but one of the things he was trying to do in doing this was rabble-rouse for a civil war. This is all
Okay.
right before the Civil War.
And see, that's what I was getting
So
at. The point was like if like how he was viewed during his time. You know, like if they were like, oh well, you know, we'll just kind of look the other way, even though we know you're doing something illegal. You know.
right. Well, the reason we know that he wasn't looked upon fondly is because he had the nickname the Red Devil.
Mm-hmm.
He was known for being dishonest, illegal, you know. So he, in my book, is this innocent 15-year-old boy just trying to live through this explosion and float on the sea with his aunt and his father. He doesn't know where his mother or his sisters and brothers are. So we're focused on that time of survival. And then yet, what do we do with our survival? Who do we choose to become when that's done?
Yeah, because that's, I mean, like, that is kind of a really polar opposite. You going from, like, you know, being a hero at, you know, 15 to, you know, being nicknamed the Red Devil because of the evil that you perpetrate.
Right. And I was so surprised at how many of the stories of this wreck had been lost to time, because it really did affect not only the city of Savannah in profound ways, but also it completely changed maritime law. And for me, it's much more interesting to talk about the parts of stories that are lost or untold or haven't been explored before, instead of retelling the stories we know over and over.
Yeah.
And this was one of them, because there, as you know, Adam, there are lots and lots of mythological stories around Savannah, Charleston, the South, you know, kind of watercolor paintings of not the fullest truth of what life was like. And so when we can tell any story from another point of view, we just get a much fuller picture of life back then. If we can look at different points of view.
Do you think that has to do, and we have to do a station ID real quick. Everybody, you're tuning in today to WRU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. Patti, do you think that that has any kind of connection with the lost cause, historical reshaping of the Civil War? You know, that campaign of trying to, I guess, reform what actually happened with the Civil War. Do you think that that has anything to do with it?
You know, I think, you know, I am no Civil War historian, but I think we do it. I think I can put a blanket statement. This is, we do it with all history. We do, I mean, from the minuscule, our family history, all the way to American history, right? We take this revisionist history and we make it sound better as we pass the stories on to our children or our families, or, you know, exponential that to a country. So that's why I was mentioning that it's not just the mythology of the stories. We have to be willing to hear other voices. And what's been extraordinary over the past years is these historical fiction novels that have risen up that have told the stories from other points of view.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's from a woman's point of view, right? I'm stepping forward and saying, let me tell you this story from her point of view.
Right.
Let me tell you the story from her point of view. And one of the grandest things that happened when I was doing my research for this novel was a very much boots on the ground research. I try to tell all the young kids, right? You can't find everything you need on Google.
Right.
And right, you're not going to find all you need
true.
on Google. And if you went and searched the Pulaski, you'll find a few articles on the steamship Pulaski and on the Titanic of the South and what happened. But in order to write an in-depth and true story, it was boots on the ground in Savannah. And it, interviews, and what I knew, but was driven home even more so in my research, was the extraordinary gems of museums that there are in Savannah.
Mm-hmm.
Extraordinary. They are our truth keepers. They are our visual storytellers. If you want to know what's really going on or what really went on, walk through the doors of those museums. The Ships of the Sea Maritime Museum, with its 9 or 11 galleries and the storytelling and the knowledge in that building is extraordinary. And all 3 of the Telfairs, of course, and the Owens Thomas House, having the courage or the foresight or whatever word you want to use to restore the slave quarters so that you don't just tour the Owens Thomas House and say, oh, look at the beautiful life they had in the 1800s. You say, oh, look why the people in the big house had this beautiful life in the 1800s. Mm-hmm. And it's visual and it's right there. The Georgia Historical Society with its boxes and records and just sitting in there and going through handwritten accounts of this shipwreck and listening to a woman named Rebecca Lamar's voice in her account of the night, in her tight handwritten accounting on vellum paper. That's irreplaceable. You can't find that on Google. And that's where the stories are.
Did you, during your research, did you find or seek out any of the ancestors or any of the people who have descended from any of these slaves on the ship?
I didn't. It's been 184 years, so that would have taken, I'm sure there are, definitely. I'm fairly sure there are still Lamars in Savannah, but they are a good 5 or 6 generations removed, almost 200 years later. So I knew they wouldn't have anything I didn't find, or maybe they would have. All of the Lamar family papers have been recovered and were found, honestly, they were found in a house in Montclair, New Jersey.
Oh, wow.
By a man named Jim Jordan, who has a book called The Slave Trader's Letter Book. And it is all the papers from that family that I follow on the ship.
Oh, wow.
Like I said, I changed their names, but yeah, so their family papers had been recovered. I had letters and I had, things like that. But one of the things I've done for some of my events coming up this week is pick maybe 15 passengers from the ship and then pick a passenger and tell you whether your fate. Did you perish or survive and how?
Okay.
And in doing that over the past couple months, and it doesn't have anything to do with my book. They're not in my book, but it's just interesting because I have a full manifest now. With all my research, I was the first one to be able to make a full manifest, and I can tell you whether they perished or whether they survived, and mostly how they survived and where they were from. And it has been really interesting to look at some of these passengers who didn't end up in the novel, but are very real and who I want to honor, and find out what their lives were like. There was a judge from New York with the last name Rochester, and his father had founded Rochester, New York, and he perished. He made it to a lifeboat, but then drowned off the breakers of North Carolina. And then the whole event comes more to life because these were very real people.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things that I find fascinating with historical fiction, when someone gets it right, and it sounds like you have. I haven't read the book, anybody yet, so then I'm not being paid to say this. Just give me all heads up.
I don't have enough money to pay.
I know, right?
I'm kidding.
But just listening to you talk about the amount of research that you've done, I am a big fan of true crime stuff, historical. Not so much fiction per se. I like historical fiction when it's done right. And I like history. And when I say done right, I mean like you don't. Okay, so everybody listening, when you're writing, you have to take liberty of some things when you're writing. But when you're writing historical fiction, the author is trying to convey that story, but they're not going to try to stretch the story. I mean, there's always going to be like a little kernel of truth and a little bit of like, you're kind of whining that yarn or whatever. But when you're doing historical fiction and you're trying to be more accurate, you don't want it to be like, well, they were off the coast of North Carolina, but there was a steamship that drove by, and like, you don't want to add stuff to it that's not truthful or factual. And at the same time, like you said, you change the names, but these are based off of real people who lived. They were flesh and blood like us, but they just lived in a different time. And so I was actually talking to a guy the other day. He's going to be coming on the show in May, and he's written a World War II, not a historical fiction book, but it's kind of like a history book, but it's at the same time it's like a retelling of what happened or whatever. And we were talking about that same subject of, because I love nonfiction stuff. I write fiction, but I love nonfiction, and it was kind of funny. He said that he started off as a fiction writer, and that he just decided that he wanted to write about the truth, and that's why he changed over to like historical.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and I was like, wow, what do you? And I asked him, I said, what do you mean by that? And he said that he just found real life more fascinating than like fantasy and things like that.
Well, that's why historical fiction, to me, is so fascinating, because it is based on something real.
Right.
And so I can grow that into a story. When people, I've written a couple historical fiction, and it's always so funny when I get a letter that essentially says, can you tell me what's real and what's fake? Right. And I always want to say, it's not really about what's real and what's fake. It's about what is fact and what is imagined.
Right.
And so for me, what is fact is there. That's why I did so much research. That better be right. I'm not gonna mess around with the facts of this ship, or what happened that night, or I just wouldn't have said it was about a real ship and a real family. I just would have written a shipwreck story.
Right.
But because it's based on something real, I try to describe it like this. If I'm writing historical fiction and it's about a real person, which my last book was, or it's about a real event like this one is, I say, imagine the book like a person. And the bones of that person have to be strong to build everything else on. And the bones are made out of the facts. So I know that ship was, launched at 8 a.m. on July 13th, 1838. The Savannah passengers paid $30 a ticket. They sailed past Tybee Island, up the coast, stopped in Charleston, spent the night, picked up a whole new set of passengers who paid $30 a ticket. They got on the ship. They sailed up the coast, right off the coast of North Carolina by Cape Fear. The boiler emptied out. The second engineer poured cold water into a hot boiler, creating a bomb. And at 11:04 p.m., that ship exploded. It took 45 minutes to sink. And during those 45 minutes, passengers fought for their lives,
Yeah.
or for floatage, or for something that would hold them. There were 4 lifeboats, only 2 of which were seaworthy. Those are the facts.
Right.
Those are the bones of the story. I am not going to change those.
Right.
So then comes the emotional truth and the imagined part. And I like to think of the imagined part, and you, right, I like to think of the imagined part more so as inspired.
Mm-hmm.
Inspired by the research, inspired by the voices I found in the accountings of that night. And so, yes, there is a family that I used isn't the right word. There is a family that inspired this family so that I could tell the truth of the times.
You kind of modeled
but I
after
didn't
them.
want to make it,
Yeah.
yes, I did not want to make it a biography.
Right.
So, yeah.
That's
so
something.
That's how I explain it.
I agree with you about what you said earlier about history and the way that it's told and that kind of thing. And we update the facts, and as things come out, I just always, when you're talking about the Red Devil, I just always thought with history how if you look at any bad person in history, they never considered themselves to be a bad person, right? Like they always thought that they were doing the right thing for what they were doing, and and some people they didn't care how they achieved those means, right? And so I always thought it was interesting with history. I read a book last year. It was a book on Genghis Khan, and it was talking about his legacy, and then like the first half of the book was just about his life, and then the second half was actually about like his sons and how they fought over each other, and that eventually that just kind of fell apart basically. But it wasn't historical fiction, but the way that the guy wrote it, it was the same kind of thing. I mean, like when you write about history or you're writing historical fiction, it has to be more factual and believable. It can't be exaggerated like fantasy writing. It has to be
right.
Like you're talking about modeling it after a family. Well, it's like, you change the names and you change some of the things to basically because you're author liberty or whatever. But it still has to be believable, and it still has to it's like we can't just change and say, hey, the Declaration of Independence was it was published in 1983. It's just not accurate, right? Not factual. So.
Right. If you're going to use historical events, you better get your research done. And when I was interviewing one of the museum curators from the Thomas Owens House,
mm-hmm.
Her name is Shannon Browning Mullis, and it was such a fascinating discussion
mm-hmm.
about how we tell these historical stories while telling the truth.
Right.
And so it's a never-ending search how to do that right.
Mm-hmm.
And like my husband, he reads nonfiction like you. Like he'd rather read a shipwreck story written from the captain's point of view that is completely nonfiction. But most of us prefer the power of an emotional story
mm-hmm.
to carry us through the historical event.
We have to do the station break real quick, Patti. So I love that. That's one of the things I like about nonfiction. Like I just finished Matthew McConaughey's Green Lights book, and
I can't wait to read it.
Yeah,
I want to hear him read it.
It is. I listened to the audiobook, and it was fantastic. But all right, so we'll be right back. We got to do the station break. Everybody, you're listening to WRU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM. WRU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul, and my special guest today is Patti Henry. And Patti, what is the name of your book again?
Surviving Savannah.
Surviving Savannah.
And actually, it's written under Patti Callahan.
Patti Callahan. Perfect. Okay, so we'll be right back, everybody.
What does it mean when we say that WRUU is a community radio station? It doesn't just mean that we invite the community to create programming. And it doesn't just mean that we are a voice for the community. It also means that we are counting on the community to keep us going. And you are the community. Almost all of our modest budget comes from small annual or monthly donations from listeners like you. You get to enjoy our community-focused programming because many others have stepped forward to do their part. Now do your part by joining our community of listener donors. Go to WRUU.org right now and make a one-time or monthly donation. And thank you for supporting Savannah's community radio station, 107.5 FM.
Yes, it is that time again to support WRUU through your vote in the Connect Savannah Best of Savannah poll. It's easy. Go to Connect Savannah at www.connectsavannah.com and click on the Go Vote image. Read the instructions and then scroll down and click on the image labeled Media. Type in WRUU in both the Best Local Radio Station and Best Talk Radio Station categories and click the Vote button for each. Thank you for listening to and supporting WRUU in the Connect Savannah Best of Savannah poll.
All right, we are back. And so, Patti, I think that's a really interesting fact. And I say fact, I mean, it's just an interesting twist on, like that take, because I feel like we all want to hear a good story, right? I think we're storytelling beings, we're storytelling creatures. And so what is it for you that got you interested in writing historical fiction?
Well, I think we agree we'd probably be best friends the minute we meet in person, because
Yeah.
the power of story is why we do what we do. It's why you do what you do. We know that human beings are built and made for story, that our brains are in search of a story. It's the way we make sense of things. So we have whatever billion brain cells we have, and they're all after one thing: make sense of things, right? Get control of things, make meaning out of things. And that's what stories do. So as storytellers, we're trying to make meaning out of the world, make sense out of the world, tell a story that maybe brings something confusing into focus, right? We're not trying to answer the questions or have definitive ways of doing things. I leave that to the philosophers. But, we're trying to make sense of things. I think that's what you're getting at, but that's why I think it's important that we do what we do.
Yeah, I agree. And like you said about surviving, it's the stories we tell ourselves and others. And so what attracted you to historical fiction per se?
So my first 9 or 10 books were actually contemporary fiction. And then approximately 5 years ago, it hasn't been that long, a story came to me that I wanted to write. And it is called Becoming Mrs. Lewis. And it is the story of C.S. Lewis's real wife, Joy Davidman. And it is about their completely improbable love story about this woman who lived in New York, was married with 2 sons, was an atheist, and then this very famous Christian apologist who lived in Oxford, England. And this is in the 40s. How could they have ever met? And I wanted to tell that story. And I wasn't thinking in my head, what I want to do is make some huge genre change and write historical fiction. I thought, this is a story worth the telling, right? This is an untold story. Everybody knows, who cares about C.S. Lewis, knows that he had this kind of tragic love story. It was memorialized in the movie Shadowlands. And that's all they know. So I wanted to tell her side of the story. I wanted to write it. Well, what happened when I wrote that book is that the historical fiction bug just bit me so hard. Like I was a goner. And before I was an author, my first career was I was a nurse. I was a pediatric nurse. And when I was a nurse, when I was in graduate school, my job was as a research nurse on a research project. And I've just always loved research. And I've loved finding the one thing that changes everything, whether it changes the story or whether it changes the equation or whether it changes the way you see something. Because if you start to dig deep enough, you're going to find the thing that changes the thing, right?
Yeah.
And so I just became very endlessly fascinated by historical fiction and just took off hard and fast. My that novel came out in 2018. I had a Audible original about Florence Nightingale called Wild Swan that came out in December. This, of course, comes out in 2 days on March 9th. And then I have another historical fiction in October. So
that's awesome.
It wasn't this deliberate, now I'm going to write historical fiction. It was, as it always is, the story that finds me, or I find it, and I say, that's the story worth telling. And then it changes my life.
That's magical.
That's what writing is, don't you think?
I do, when it's right. You know,
when it's right. When it's not, it's headbanging, isn't it?
Yeah. You know, I love Ray Bradbury. As a kid, I read the Fahrenheit 451, the compulsory read in high school. I didn't touch his work until this last year. And one of the things that he talks about is like when you're writing and you're writing from the heart, you feel it, right? And if you're having writer's block, it means that your heart's not lined up with it. And so when, you know, listening to you talk about your love for writing, not just historical fiction, but, you know, just writing in general, you know, you can feel it, you can tell, you know, and I think that's one of the keys out there. You know, I'm not a best-selling author. I'm just a small published author, and I write for the paper here in Savannah. And, you know, but I do believe that the authors that I've seen and met and talked with that are successful people are the ones that mirror what you just said. You know, you just kind of, this is the story for me. This is the one I'm going to write. And, you know, it's like you're all in, and you don't sit there and push it. It's like kind of pulling you along, you know?
Yeah.
I think that's so magical.
And Adam, it doesn't matter whether you're writing it for the Savannah paper or writing it for a novel or writing it for a textbook. If it's the story that feels like it needs telling, then it's yours to tell. The outcome is not up to us, right? It's up to us to say yes to the story and give it our absolute best shot.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Yeah, I think that's the nice thing about it. It's kind of like you know, I don't know if you have children or not, but, you know, it's like having children and you're raising children, and, you know, you have to, at some point they have to go out in the world. You know? I
know. I have 3 of them, and
yeah, my wife and I do too.
Now in the world, yeah, and I still want to call and say, you know, it'd be better if you did it this way.
Yeah, that's like for me, like that's like a story. It's like one of my children, and I'm like, okay, well, you know, I'm going to do as much rearing as I can and raising you as I can, and then at some point, it's like
I gave it all I've got.
Yeah,
now you go do your thing.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's hard. I mean, this book comes out in 2 days, and I have lost control of it. It is now belongs to the reader.
Yeah.
I've done my part, right? I spent years researching it and writing it. The publishing house has done their part. They've put on the cover and published it and put it out into the world. The bookstores are doing their part. You know, E-Shaver here in Savannah, you know, we're having an event on Tuesday and they're doing their part. But really, now it's up to the reader.
Yeah, I think that's something else too with this last year with the pandemic and everything. We've had a big change in the way we have to do things, right? And I feel like books, you know, it's so crazy to me that like the average American doesn't read. They read, but they don't read books, you know. And I think this last year for the folks that kind of fallen back in love with reading or have come around to reading again, you know, there's a genre for anything and everything, you know.
Yep.
Like you said with your husband, he'd like to read that, you know, that captain's manifest of what happened on the ship, you know. Or like me, I like to read, you know, like we were talking about Matthew McConaughey. I listen to that because I like those kind of stories. So that's the magic of reading for me. It's like, oh, there's something for everybody.
And I think COVID has done that. They say book sales are way up, and there's those of us like me who will read anything. If there's nothing available, I'll read the cereal box. Right. So there's but then there's those who have just mostly it's people who have rediscovered. Yeah. But we have lost some of our attention span, right? With social media and with the quick blasts and the quick articles and the quick headlines and the quick scrolling. So to the pleasure of sustained reading not only is necessary for our brains and for us to get back into some semblance of normalcy, but is also just, one of the best ways to pass the time and to enrich your life.
I couldn't agree with you more. I saw a video from a marketer the other day, and they were talking about the attention span has dropped dramatically to like they're estimating 6.8 seconds, and then there has to be like a pattern interrupt, or there has to be something to re-garner that attention. And they were saying that the average goldfish has a 9-second attention span. And
and I believe it. I mean, haven't you, even me who writes for hours at a time and must maintain a sustained attention span, and you have a show and you write, haven't you noticed that our attention spans are a little more fragmented?
I tell you, I yes, and in a weird way for me, because I'm not I'm not anti-system or anything like that, but consumerism is what, it's like, there's a lot of consumerism. Like, we're being sold to all day long, 24 hours a day. Like, our phones send these little signals back and forth. Like, have you ever noticed if you go to a store, even if you don't have your phone on, you'll get an ad pop up for something like you might have been looking at in the store?
Yeah.
There are ultrasonic signals that your phone are sending to different things in the store. And so, like, I'm kind of, at the same time, like the attention span thing, it's more of like, I'm almost like, if I feel like there's an ad coming at me, I'm like, I shut down. I'm just like, nope, I don't want this. I don't want to be sold to. If you want to inform me, if you want to talk to me about it, if you want to, say, hey, I noticed that you like historical fiction, you might want to check out Patti Callahan's, Surviving Savannah story. I'm probably getting that wrong. I've had like this terrible migraine all day, so I'm sorry, I can't remember.
Oh, I'm so sorry. And you said it exactly right. So
okay.
There you go.
But if, like, we're talking about it and it's informative, and I'm not, sitting there telling people, go buy the book. You're not telling people, go buy the book. But what you're saying is like, hey, if you like these kind of stories, this is what I'm doing. And I feel like that's the connection, with the attention span. It's like people pay attention to what they want to pay attention to, but it's so much more hyper focused, I feel like, now, that, even like back when I was a kid, I was born in 76, so coming up in the 80s and 90s, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have, we had TV, but these phones, anything and everything you want. Like you said, you can't look everything up on Google. You have to do boots on the ground type stuff,
Yeah.
And reading for me is that kind of grounding against saying, hey, wait a minute, let me get off the electronics. And let me hold a book in my hand. Right. And let me, stop doom scrolling on, Facebook or whatever. And let me read a book or writing sometimes too. It's like,
we have to fight for sustained attention, where we used to be able to, okay, now I'm going to deliberately stop and check my email, or deliberately stop and go to Facebook. But it's gotten to the point where we're so divided. We're on the phone and checking our Facebook and looking over at Instagram, and we're the sustained attention and reading and stories. They bring us back to center. They bring us back to ourself. They bring us back to sustained attention.
That's one of the reasons why I like doing this casual style conversation for the radio show, because I don't really like I'm not saying that I won't participate in a Q&A, but for me,
Right.
I don't really enjoy doing the Q&A, back and forth soundbite. I call it a soundbite because that's what we all expect. Like, we want to read the headlines. We want to hear the soundbite. We want to, Patti Callahan said this, we want that, right? With the radio show, being able to talk a little bit more in depth and however it floats, it's just whatever.
No, I forgot we were on the radio.
I know, right?
It feels like we're just having a great afternoon conversation. It's wonderful. Yeah.
I feel like that's something that's so important too. Just connecting with people, either face to face or voice to voice if we can. I think that human connection, like we're talking about storytelling, we're all storytelling creatures and beings. That conversation is an art that I feel like people need to try to, reconnect with, it's just, I
I'm
feel like
hoping
it's
as we get back in the world, right?
right,
As the
right.
world opens up, Adam, maybe it'll get a little bit better. I don't know.
It's gonna get there. We need to do the station break real quick, Patty and Sebastian. You're gonna play some more for us, right? I'm not sure what you might have to use that mic over there because I don't know what's up with this one. This is Sebastian Messer, everybody, and sorry about that. I turn that back off. I said, there we go. All right. Turn it off. Awesome. Thank you, Sebastian. I appreciate you playing. So you are listening to us live here on WRUULP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. I agree with you, Patty. I think as people can get back in the world, but one of the things I have really enjoyed this last year is the creative way people have reached out and connected, especially, people who provide educational stuff, entertainment, those kind of things. I mean, like yourself with, you still persisted and you finished a book, you know what I mean? And you got a new book coming out, which is, I think it's just fantastic.
Oh, thank you. I think we all used the time that was given back to us in different ways. And the anxiety, I think back to exactly a year ago today. And I was actually in London at a book event, and it was like, you better get home. It's about to shut down. What are you talking about? Shut down? Right. What is this, World War II? Okay, I'll go home, right? And we it's hard to remember, but we had no idea what this thing was. And I was traveling a ton back then for my last book, and all of a sudden I wasn't. Right? Mm-hmm. My events, there were probably 15, and they fell in a domino effect. Mm-hmm. And I had hours. Yes, they were anxiety-filled hours, but I had hours given back to me like a gift. And my sons came home from college, and we were all in the house again. And I started writing again in a much more focused and intense way, because number one, writing has always been my way to manage anxiety and, to escape whatever and to focus in. And also just the sheer hours we were given back when we were told you can't leave. So you can't go anywhere. Yeah. And so I did. I wrote this book was mostly finished when COVID hit, but I wrote the book that comes out in October, and I wrote 2 short stories, one for Audible and one for an anthology. So there was a weird, I don't know. I had this weird thing where I felt like I didn't want to waste it. Mm-hmm. Did you feel that way a little bit in the beginning?
Yeah. It was just one of those things. I ended up working throughout most of it, and because I do electrical work, and then we had a period of time where we were off on that. It was the paycheck protection thing where we were off work.
PP, yeah.
We had about 6 weeks of that, and then I worked through December, and then I've been on temporary layoff. I've worked somewhat, but yeah, it's been on and off for me. But that's, well, the first time I was like, oh, just kind of enjoying it because I was working, and whatever. And the first time, like the first 6 weeks, I was like, oh my gosh. But I get to like after week 2, and I was like, what? I'd like to get back to work. I'd like to get back to doing whatever. And then this time with since December, I have really focused and honed in on my writing and publishing. And so yeah, I did. I was like, I'd like to make use of this time. And the whole time I've stayed active with the radio show. We haven't had guests in the studio for safety reasons, but I've had my show the whole time because I was like, this is something that I can do to give back to the community, and also not just the listeners, but also the guests. Because we're all in this together. We're all trying to get out there and talk to people about what we're doing and that kind of thing. So yeah, I did feel that way. I've had ups and downs with it, and had that little fog, over me too.
Oh,
and,
I had that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm going to look at this, and it's a blessing in disguise in a way, So.
Yeah, and there were some blessings in disguise. And did you feel like your writing was more focused or less focused?
Yeah, it was. It was crazy because there were some times where I was like, oh, this is the best thing I've ever written. And then other times it was like, I can't even put a sentence together.
I know. That's why I was asking you to know if I was crazy. There were days that I was just like, it was flowing. And then there were other days I knew I'd never write again because the world was coming undone.
Right. Yeah, that's. I think that was. Yeah, it'll be interesting. Especially since you're historical fiction expert. It'll be interesting. 15 or 20 years from now, how the retelling of this will happen. And what people will say and that kind of thing. So.
How will we talk? How will we view it? How will we look at it? I think that all the time. I don't think we're really going to understand it, both medically and psychologically, for at least a decade. I think we have to give it some space.
Patti, I really have enjoyed talking with you today. Can you let us know what's the best place to go check out your new book?
Absolutely. So Surviving Savannah can be found anywhere books are sold. If you're in Savannah, I would love for you to go to E. Shaver Booksellers and grab it from the amazing booksellers there. I actually have an event Tuesday night. Of course, it isn't live. It is virtual, but it is streaming live from the Ships of the Sea Maritime Museum.
Oh, wonderful.
And I have, I have artifacts and treasures from the bottom of the ocean that I'll be showing for the first time that night. So if you want more information on that, you can go to the E. Shaver Booksellers website or my website, PattiCallahanHenry.com or PattiCallahan.com, and you can learn about it. But I'll be having virtual events all week to talk about it. But the one on Tuesday night, I'm in Savannah and doing it from the Ships of the Sea Maritime Museum. Yeah.
But that won't be open to the public. It'll be a virtual event, right?
Yes, it'll be virtual.
Okay, so I just want to make sure so people don't show up and
people don't show up at the Ships.
Patti said I could come in. Like, no, Patti did not say you could come in.
Patti gave me special permission.
Yeah, you'll have one out of the bunch. They'll be like, Patti said on the radio. We're like, no, Patti did not say that on the radio. Well, Adam said no. Adam did not say it.
Will be at the Ships of the Sea.
Right.
You will be at your computer.
You can look it up on your phone.
Yeah, there you
go. Thank you so much, Patti. I really appreciate you being on the show today with me, and I'm looking forward to checking out your book.
No, this was such a wonderful way to spend a Sunday afternoon. It's so much fun talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.